Okay, here we are. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the next edition of Therapy Thursday. Today is Thursday, June 3rd, 2021. My name is Evan Adler. I am a physical therapist here at UNC Healthcare, UNC Therapy Services. I am the chair of the Community Engagement Committee. And we are bringing you another edition of Therapy Thursday. This is our way of reaching out to the community, providing information, and just going ahead and trying to provide something to you in this time of COVID where we're not really as hands-on as we were previously, but still wanting to provide a service to everybody out there. So today we are going to be talking about healthy and happy knees, keys to longevity and optimal performance. And today's presenter will be Madi Franek. He is a therapist over at our Meadowmont location in Chapel Hill. And I just wanted to remind everybody that all of our Therapy Thursday talks can be found on our YouTube channel. And we encourage you to subscribe to that and to also like our Facebook page for UNC Therapy Services, where you can find all sorts of good information and find out about upcoming events such as Therapy Thursdays and new in-person events that will be coming up now that restrictions are now lifting. So we will be back in person doing some things. I'm going to go ahead and utilize the chat feature here and go ahead and drop those links in there once again for everybody. Throughout the course of the presentation today, if you do have questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat. I will be monitoring it and helping Madi out so we can answer some questions. And we're also going to leave some time at the end for some questions. So yeah, so enjoy the talk, and I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Madi.
All right. Well, first off, I just want to say thank you, Evan, for providing me this opportunity again. It was great to kind of have the first talk, and hopefully the second one will be just as enjoyable. So I just want to say thank you for that. As Evan already kind of mentioned, today's kind of talk is going to be about healthy, happy knees and kind of three keys that I feel are kind of beneficial for not only longevity, but also optimal performance. And I want to just kind of make a little caveat in terms of what we mean by performance. I think that can kind of stem anywhere from kind of day-to-day activities, right? Making kind of going up and downstairs, getting up and having a chair more efficient, but also kind of on the more recreational side of things in terms of running or lifting, just kind of whatever that means to you. So I think these kind of extend across the board in terms of however you define performance, but I think they're applicable across the board. So as Evan mentioned, again, I'm a physical therapist with UNC over at our Meadowmont location. And let's kind of dive into things. So just kind of a little bit about me. So I'm from Florida, specifically from the Sarasota, Bradenton area, for anyone that's familiar with it. I did my bachelor's in exercise science from the University of South Florida, where I graduated in 2015. From there, I came up to the other blue across the street, and I got my DPT from Duke and graduated there in 2018. So I've been practicing a little over 3 years now. And then when I graduated from Duke, I went on to get some advanced training through the Institute for Athlete Regeneration and became a certified sports and orthopedic therapist. As this talk kind of already implies, my clinical interests really are related to the knee, both non-operative as well as operative cases, with specific kind of clinical interest in ACL rehabilitation, patellofemoral pain syndrome, also referred to as runner's knee, as well as patellar tendonitis or patellar tendinopathy, which is commonly referred to as jumper's knee. So in regards to today's agenda, there are kind of three kind of items I wanted to discuss. The first is looking at our traditional kind of strengthening approach in terms of our functional closed chain or more weight-bearing exercises, things we think of such as squats, lunges, step-ups, and maybe how we can kind of go about those exercises in a little bit more of an efficient way to really optimize quadricep strength, which is, for me, it's a really big indicator of overall knee health. From there, we'll kind of talk about functional strengthening and why I think that's relevant, but why I also think that isolated strength is a key component in terms of this whole idea of healthy, happy knees. And then for those of us that engage in any sort of running related activities, we will also dive into the calf complex, specifically talking about the soleus musculature and why that's a very beneficial muscle for those of us that engage in running. So I want to begin with just kind of talking about a past experience and kind of relating this and why I'm kind of so interested in this topic. So when I graduated from physical therapy school, again, almost 3 years ago, my wife and I had planned a trip to the beautiful West Coast. For anyone that's familiar with this image, this is Seattle. So we got into Seattle and again, kind of dropped our bags off and immediately went into kind of touristy based activities. Prior to this, I think I'd been walking, I don't know, probably 10, 12,000 steps during my last clinical rotation. And obviously when you go on vacation, you do sometimes a lot more activity than what you're usually accustomed to. So throughout the course of our time in Seattle, I think I was walking anywhere from 16,000 to 22,000 steps. Again, an exponential increase from what I had been doing previously. Now, anyone that's been to Seattle, this is beautiful Cary Park in terms of where this is overlooking. You can kind of identify that getting up to that is a pretty steep hike. I'd probably have to guess it's anywhere from like a 30 to 40 degree angle in terms of walking up. And it's about a 10 to 15 minute walk kind of getting up there. So it was something that I wasn't really accustomed to in terms of a lot of uphill type work and downhill type of work. I was used to a lot of flat surfaces in terms of my last clinical rotation. So this was something that my body wasn't necessarily accustomed to at that time. As we were leaving Seattle, our next trip was we were getting on a train to go to Portland, and I noticed that I was starting to have some discomfort kind of right below the kneecap, what we call kind of the patellar tendon. At the time, I didn't really pay much attention to it. I just kind of rubbed it and got on the train, and we ended up in Portland. And when we got there, again, we set our bags down and went for I think it was an 8 or 9 mile bike ride, which again was something that I was not accustomed to at all. Throughout the course of the rest of the trip, I didn't really pay much attention to it. It was still kind of there over the 2 weeks that we were on the trip, but I didn't really pay much attention to it. Got back to North Carolina and put 2 and 2 together and realized that I had developed what we call patellar tendonitis or patellar tendinopathy. And this was, in my opinion, due to this kind of overload in terms of the amount of activity that I was doing relative to what I've been doing previously. So for anyone that kind of has experience or knows what a tendinopathy is, we know they're very sensitive in terms of not doing too much, but doing too much and trying to find this delicate kind of balance in terms of what we call almost like the Goldilocks principle. And so over the course of the last couple of years, in terms of how much activity that I'm kind of doing from time to time, it'll let me know that that's still there. And so these are just kind of principles through treatment approaches that I've kind of helped with my own self and hoping to share with the group in terms of things that if you've ever had knee pain, hopefully these are things that can be beneficial. But if you've never had knee pain, hopefully these things can also be beneficial in terms of mitigating the risk from occurring in the future. So as I mentioned, I first want to kind of start off by talking about our functional based exercises. So when we kind of think about our squats and our lunges and our step ups, I think we really have to kind of consider what our goal or what our purpose is. And what I mean by that is what kind of areas do we want to specifically target? So for today's talk, we're going to be talking about the quadricep muscle, which we know is kind of that muscle that lies on the front of the thigh. And so when we look at our functional exercises, there's a variety of ways we can perform them based on body position. If you look at these 2 images, we know that they're the same exact exercise, but there are varied angles in terms of where the trunk position is and then where that kind of shin position is, okay? If we look at the white line right there, this is what we call the center of mass. Now, the 2 other lines, the red and then the green line, those are what we call moment arms. And essentially, that just means the distance from our joint relative to our center of mass. So this red line is simply the moment arm from our knee to our center of mass, and the green is the moment arm from our hip to our center of mass. You can kind of see in this image on the left that they're fairly equal to each other. If we go to the bottom right image, what you'll see is a slightly different position in terms of the shin angle as well as the trunk. We still have a very similar center of mass, but we see kind of those moment arms are a little bit differently. So you'll see the moment arm in relation to the knee, that red line, it's a little bit more increased, and the green in relation to the hip is a little bit decreased. So what this simply means is that if we kind of have a similar position in this top left, it's going to be a less demand on the quadricep in relation to what we see in this bottom right. So if we're talking about trying to optimize overall knee health, which kind of gets back to what I believe is kind of quadricep strength and quadricep health, then we want to start to kind of consider how can we manipulate body angle, whether it's the shin or whether it's the trunk, to put a little bit of more stress on that quadricep-based muscle. So we're going to kind of take this concept of biomechanics and apply it to an exercise that I really like. So I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background in terms of just kind of showing how can we start to kind of think and consider how we can kind of manipulate our body position to get the most out of an exercise. So a heel elevated squat is a very, very good exercise, at least in my opinion. This is what we call almost like a wall slide, where the individual has their back kind of pressed against the wall. And if you can kind of see in the bottom of the picture, the heels are in a slightly elevated position. Now, I like this exercise with the wall slide because what's going to happen is if we kind of go back to this picture right here in the bottom right, what you'll see is as that kind of knee drives forward a little bit over the toes, we increase the moment arm at the knee. So if we kind of go back and we look at this picture as well, as we're driving those knees forward, right, and we're kind of keeping that trunk in a relatively upright position, we're increasing the demand on the quadriceps with this specific exercise. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be done with like a foam roller. Sometimes you may often see it with people just kind of sliding up and down the wall. But it can also be used with a yoga ball. That's where I've kind of seen this done pretty well in terms of a general exercise. Now we'll kind of dive into why I like the heel elevated position in some coming slides, but I just want to kind of offer this as a beginner kind of variation in terms of a functional exercise. I think if we look at like a regular squat, this is a good way to kind of modify it to get a little bit more of a quadricep dominant squat. If we look at two other progressions, keep in mind these are advanced variations. These are for individuals that have been training for a decent amount of time and have a pretty strong background in resistance training. We have what I call an intermediate bilateral variation and more of an advanced bilateral variation. What you'll see in both of these positions is that the heels slightly are a little bit more elevated. So we see this picture in the top left. Again, you could argue it's maybe somewhat similar to that first picture, but again, somewhat of a progressive position in terms of where the heels are propped up. In that advanced variation, you're going to see the heels are propped up tremendously. So this is why I like this as an advanced variation, because of the degree of difficulty that this is going to place on the quadricep. Now, the reason, again, that I say that these are advanced variations as well is because of where this kind of shin angle is in relation to the floor, and we'll kind of talk about that in a second. But I just wanted to kind of offer some different variations depending upon your background in terms of resistance training. Now, I also like both these variations because of where the barbell is in relation to the body. So oftentimes when we do squats or lunges, etc., we'll kind of take the weight and we'll do like a goblet squat variation, or we'll kind of hold the weight in front of us like a front squat or something along those lines. If we go back to that center of mass that we talked about in a couple slides ago, as the weight goes a little bit more forward, what that happens is our center of mass shifts closer to our knee, and we shrink the moment arm that happens at our knee. So basically, in short terms, that's just decreasing the amount of load that's going through that quadricep. If we take the weight and we kind of shift it behind us, whether it's a barbell, a kettlebell, a dumbbell, etc., that simply shifts our center of mass backwards and thus increases the demand on the quadricep. So I just wanted to kind of show, we call these hack squat variations. I just wanted to kind of show these variations as potential ways that you can start to kind of consider how can we start to manipulate not only our body position, but also placing the weight to have a little bit more of an increased demand on those quadriceps, okay? So this is an alternative variation. This is, again, another advanced variation. We call this a Spanish squat. Now, what you'll notice within this particular variation is the shin angle is not so much in that kind of angled or like 45-degree angle that we saw in those previous pictures, but this is a very advanced variation because of the degree of bending that's happening while maintaining an upright trunk position. So what you'll see in this is this individual is securing a pretty thick and strong resistance band around a squat rack and having that around a movable object. And then basically all he's doing is he's sitting his hips back. Again, his center of mass is going backwards, and thus he's placing a relatively large demand on this quadricep-based musculature. This can be done, not necessarily, doesn't have to be done with a band. I've seen it done with people kind of placing their legs on the back of a bench and kind of securing their feet in the bottom bench, kind of sitting back like that. If you have any questions about that variation, I'd be more than willing to kind of show some YouTube links in email if you have any questions. But I just wanted to kind of offer some different variations in regards to how can we start to, again, manipulate body angle, weight positioning to get a better load on our quadricep, and then again with this goal of kind of optimizing overall knee health. So that's kind of our kind of functional exercise and how I think we can kind of rethink these things to get a better variation of that. Now, when we look at a kind of a traditional single leg knee extension in that bottom right, this is kind of what you've probably used at the gym in terms of getting on a machine and kind of going out and back like that. If we go and we look at kind of how this functional exercise compares to that, what we're going to see is we're going to look at where the angle of force is going. So as we prop our toes up more and more, what happens is the angle goes like this. And what that does is it somewhat mimics the way the angle is shaped when we're on a knee extension machine. So if you don't have access to a knee extension or something that you're not a big fan of, getting those heels propped up in that slightly elevated position can be a great way to replicate a knee extension machine and can be a good starting exercise. Keep in mind, the more that the heels kind of come up, or the more we're kind of placed up on our toes, the more we're going to simulate what a knee extension machine starts to look like. So again, I think it's really interesting that we can just manipulate heel position and we can kind of change where the force is being applied, again, more perpendicular to the floor as opposed to parallel to the floor in a general squat or lunge sense, to start to replicate the demand that's placed on the quadriceps that occurs during a single leg knee extension. So again, I just wanted to kind of show how that compares to a machine-based variation as well. Now, keep in mind there are limitations when we talk about functional exercise. When we talk about closed chain or weight-bearing positions, keep in mind we're not just looking at load that's going through the quadricep or the knee, but we're also looking at both the hip as well as the ankle complex. Now, for those of us that have had any sort of knee-related injury in the past or knee pain in the past, as well as those of us who don't necessarily train the quadriceps in an isolated fashion, this is definitely a consideration that we've got to kind of keep in mind, because it's very easy, even if we may not necessarily be feeling it, it's very easy to shift the load. Your body's very smart to shift it in areas that it may be stronger. So for example, if you're not doing a lot of isolated strengthening, or if you've had knee pain or knee injuries in the past, your body's very smart and very good at shifting the load both to the hip as well as to the calf complex, but also to the contralateral or the other extremity. So again, there are some limitations when we look at this. And a lot of this kind of comes from what we call the ACL literature. So for those individuals that have gone through rehabilitation after tearing their ACL, we put them through kind of a battery of tests, more so towards the end of their time in rehab with us. And we do a combination of testing. We look at both functional testing, as you see in the top left, we call kind of HOP testing. And then we'll sometimes put them in a isolated testing. We don't necessarily have one of these devices right now, but we'll do isolated testing. This is done with the gold standard of an isokinetic dynamometer, which is what you kind of see in this bottom right. Now, it's really interesting when we've looked at research and we've looked at the functional testing. Oftentimes what will happen is when we do this return to sport testing or return to running testing, these people will demonstrate symmetry from side to side. You may not necessarily notice really any difference just by the amount of distance that they're hopping. However, when we put them on an isolated test, we oftentimes see very large differences from side to side. And what this kind of tells us is that, again, our body's very good at kind of shifting load in other places to make it seem like we're symmetrical or make it seem like we're equal from side to side. But in actuality, we may be hiding those deficits by compensating other areas of the body, such as the hip and at the knee, or as we mentioned, on the opposite extremity. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of justification for why I think isolated strengthening can be a good thing, and why, again, there may be some limitations if functional or closed chain exercises are the only thing that we're doing in our training process. So when we look at isolated strengthening, the knee extensions have gotten a bad rap over time. And as you see within these two different photos, again, they've been claimed as one of the 5 worst exercises to do in regards to your knee. And they've been kind of quoted as this idea of, is it a friend or a foe? Over the next couple of slides, I really want to try to identify kind of my opinion on this and try to offer some solutions in terms of, if you're not already doing these, how to maybe go about implementing these within the context of your training process. So hold on, this is going to get a little complicated, but I'm going to try to simplify this. We've got this graph on the left and we've got these pictures on the right. So when we look at the graph on the left, you're going to see three different lines. You're going to see kind of this green line, you're going to see an orange line, and you're going to see a blue line. What all of these are referring to are basically the amount of stress that's going through the knee joint when we're performing different activities. So the green line is the amount of stress that is going through the knee joint when we're doing a closed chain exercise, such as a squat, a lunge, a step down, etc. The orange line is the amount of stress that's going through the knee joint when we're doing a knee extension on a traditional machine, such as what you see in the far right. The blue line is also the amount of stress that goes to the knee joint, but it's in a little bit of a non-traditional sense on a knee extension machine. So that's what you'll see in this this picture on the left in terms of the knee extension. So it's a little bit different load profile going through the knee joint. This would be very similar like if you did it with an ankle weight, which is, again, it's all just based upon where the load is being placed and where the stress is going through. What I really want to try to identify at this is kind of looking at how a closed chain exercise compares to an open kinetic chain exercise in regards to the amount of stress that's going through the knee. So most of us, when we're performing squats or lunges or step downs, we're probably getting beyond 45 degrees. I'd probably say we're probably getting anywhere from probably 60 to 75 degrees. And so I want to have you guys just kind of take a quick look at that green line and where it's at between 60 and 75 degrees and the amount of stress that's going through the knee joint. If we compare that, let's say, to the orange line, what we can see is the amount of stress that's going through the knee joint is actually less than the amount of stress that we're experiencing within the context of our traditional closed chain squatting, lunging exercises. So again, to say this knee extension is a bad exercise, I think that's a little short-sighted. I think there's some validity to that statement, specifically as we're talking about some of the end range stuff. So going from, if we're looking at that orange line, going from 15 to 0 degrees, you could argue, okay, maybe that's starting to place a little bit of an increased stress, maybe a little bit more than what we may be experiencing in our closed chain exercises. But it just goes back to our programming, which if we're going, say, 90 to 45 degrees, then the amount of stress that's going through that knee joint is actually going to be a little bit less than maybe what we're experiencing during our traditional closed chain exercises. So that brings us back to our point. Is this a friend or is this a foe? In my opinion, I think if we program it correctly, I think it's more of a friend than it is a foe. And I think we can kind of cross this out in regards to looking at this as one of the 5 worst exercises. Now, one thing I do want to kind of make a note of, like we talked about in the graph in the previous slide, if we're doing this for the first time, if we don't have a background in performing this exercise, do we want to go all the way straight when we're performing the exercise? Maybe not. Maybe we just want to go halfway. I think that's a great starting point to begin with. And as you have some history with this exercise, then I think you can start to kind of challenge going all the way straight. Keep in mind, though, if we kind of go about halfway, that's where our quadricep is going to be strongest in relation to going all the way straight. So you could even argue going from 90 to 45 or 90 about halfway may actually be more beneficial in terms of strengthening that quadricep-based musculature relative to going all the way straight. So some of us in pandemic times, again, may not have access to a gym at the moment, but we may have some things at the house that we may be able to kind of replicate or take this exercise and be able to perform at home. So I'm a huge fan of isometrics. I think they're good places to start. What you'll see in these 2 pictures is this individual, Mick Hughes, who's a physiotherapist in Australia. He's simply taking a yoga ball, which a lot of us will have from time to time, and he's turning this exercise into a great single leg knee extension. Now you'll see 90 degrees and 60 degrees. All he's doing is he's sitting in a chair and he's basically just pushing the ball into a squat rack at this point, but this can be pushed into a wall as well. I wouldn't really have any issue with 90 or 60. I'd probably start a little bit on 90 and then go to 60 just because we're going to be able to put a little bit more force at 60 degrees because of the strength in that position. But I just want to kind of offer some variations to a knee extension machine if we don't have access to it. It's something that we can kind of perform at home.
Hey, Maddie.
So yeah,
I could just jump in real quick. There was a question that came up regarding that graph slide. And the question was how the stress was measured on knee extension in regards to that slide. Do you happen to know that information?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics behind that in regards to how it was measured. I'm not sure if they used a mathematical model or how exactly they kind of went about it. If someone's interested in diving into the specifics, I think it is actually an open access article, and it's by Chris Powers out of the University of Southern California. I think it was done in 2014. So I would just type something like, squats versus knee extensions, Chris Powers, 2014. And this article may be able to be pop up. This graph was actually pulled from an article by a physical therapist named Eric Myra, and he has a commentary that was done in, I think, sometime in the mid 2000s. But it's basically just called patellofemoral pain, and Eric Myra, and this is where this graph is kind of pulled from. So that might be another article to look into in terms of how that was measured. But I don't know the specifics off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Problem. So again, kind of talk about the isometrics. When it comes to isometrics, there's different ways that we can kind of talk about their programming. Usually where I'll kind of have people start is more of this hypertrophy realm. And again, just like we kind of talked about earlier in terms of kind of taking it easy if you haven't done these before and then progressively challenging the system over time. If you're kind of starting with more of an isometric protocol, I'd probably start on the lighter end of a lot of these things. So again, 70% in terms of how hard you may be pushing. You'll start on the lower end, like 3 to 5 seconds, then building up gradually over time. And then kind of starting off in terms of the total time under tension, starting off at around 80 seconds in total, and then building up to around 115. And we kind of see here, again, the 2 to 5 reps, 2 to 5 sets. It can oftentimes be a good place to start in terms of 2 to 3 and then 2 to 3 respectively. So I just wanted to kind of provide this as an opportunity for someone to say, hey, listen, let me just play some of this. Because again, where someone with their training history, they may fall more of this hypertrophy base, but if you're more advanced, you may fall from the strength base. Just like we kind of talked about with the knee extension machine, there's going to be different parts of the continuum that people are going to fall on. So this is just a good chart to kind of begin with in regards to how can we maybe take that exercise and make it more applicable to individual cases. Now, if people don't have a yoga ball, well, then we can actually take a yoga position and turn this into a great quadricep base strengthening exercise. So again, a lot of us are familiar with this downward dog position that we perform in yoga from time to time. Now, the reason I like this specific exercise, as we mentioned earlier, where is this? If we kind of look at the top left picture, if we look at the shin, where is the shin in relation to the ground? It's that perpendicular force that we were kind of talking about earlier, which is that same load profile that we get on a knee extension machine. It's going to be perpendicular to the tibia. So we can actually take a downward dog exercise and turn it into a very good quadricep base strengthening exercise, as you see in this particular position. Now, this is a beginner variation. Another variation that we could try, again, if you have any issues with kind of getting down on the ground and getting down on the knees, this is another good variation, which just kind of takes like a table or a ledge to be able to perform. Again, very similar. You'll see, again, that shin is going to be perpendicular to the floor, thus creating a good load profile for that quadricep. If we look at a little bit of a more intermediate variation, what you'll see is the individual in this picture is taking a resistance band and simply securing it around the back of his knee. Again, is adding a little bit of increased resistance or a little increased load to that quadricep musculature. For those of us that like advanced variations or want a little bit more of a challenge, there's a challenge up on a bench or up on a chair. Again, keep in mind this is going to take some upper body strength. So I wouldn't be performing this if we don't have the appropriate upper body strength to be able to perform. But again, we put our knees in a more flexed position, which means that we're going to have to use our quadriceps to be able to come out of that position a little bit more. So that's why I consider this more of an advanced variation. And then we've got a single leg variation, which again is, in my opinion, another advanced one, just because it's going from 2 legs to 1. So again, we've now offered a variety of opportunities. If we don't have access to a gym, I think that's a great place to start. We've given an example of how we can do this with a yoga ball, but we've also showed how we can do this with a simple yoga pose, such as the downward dog. So I just wanted to kind of offer just some various solutions depending upon what you have available to you, or just your preferences in terms of exercise in general. Now, for those of us that engage in running related activities, the quadriceps are a great place. We can target those with our functional training. We can target those with our isolated strengthening. Let's also keep in mind the calf complex and how important that calf complex is. So when we look at this kind of muscle force distribution of this individual running in the top left, what you'll see is that quadricep takes on a decent amount of load, right? 4 to 6 times our body weight. But look at the degree of the soleus and the gastrocnemius, which is our calf muscles, and you see in that bottom right hand picture. the amount of load that's going through that calf complex is anywhere from, was that 9 to 11 times our body weight, which is significantly more than what our quadricep is experiencing and way more than what we're experiencing at our hip complex. So I think those of us that are engaging in running related activities, I think this is definitely an area that we need to treat with a little bit more respect because the amount of load that's going through that complex. And I think we can argue if we have maybe a weak or maybe an untrained area, maybe we're putting a little bit more load into some other areas as opposed to getting that equal distribution across the board. This is just kind of another graph that I wanted to kind of show. If you kind of look in that middle graph in terms of running, the gray area is the amount of stress going through that ankle complex. Black is what's going through the knee, and then white's kind of going through the hip. I just wanted to kind of show just another example of how much load is going through that calf complex when we're engaging in running related activities. So again, just another kind of reason or justification for why I think this is a great place to target alongside our quad-based strengthening exercises. Now, when we talk about soleus strengthening, what we've got to keep in mind is the degree of knee bending that's occurring. So to bias that soleus musculature, and if we kind of go back a couple slides, when we look at the soleus musculature, it's this thin little strip that sits behind the big kind of calf complex called the gastrocnemius muscle, okay? Now, to bias that musculature, it's important that what we're doing is we're getting the knee bent to approximately 60 degrees, which is what you're going to see the individual in this picture doing. Now, this exercise does not necessarily have to be performed within the context of the foot being placed on a plate like you see in this picture. This is an advanced variation and definitely something that I'd be a little cautious with if you've ever had like a calf injury or Achilles tendinopathy or something along Achilles injury. This is definitely an advanced variation in that sense. But what you'll see is throughout both pictures, the knee is staying relatively bent throughout the entire exercise, and then he's simply just doing a calf raise, kind of coming up on the toes. Again, like I said, this can be performed on the floor as a great starting variation, as a beginner variation. And over time, the more advanced training you have, again, you can kind of come up onto this plate elevated position, or if you take like a backpack or add some weights to it, those can be a great kind of progressions from this respected exercise. So again, I just wanted to kind of offer for those of us that engage in running related activities, these can be great progressions to aim for in addition to that quadricep based musculature. And we'll just kind of circle again the importance of keeping that knee bent throughout this entire exercise. So first off, I just want to again say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present. I'm very thankful for everyone that was attending today's talk, and hopefully you guys got something out of it. Again, in a nutshell, I think there are different ways that we can kind of go about optimizing our kind of strength training routine if that's something that we're engaging in. We kind of talked at the beginning about how we can kind of manipulate body angle and manipulate shin angle to get a little bit more of stress on our quadricep. I think those are things that we need to kind of consider, and definitely go back after this presentation is over. Go back, watching our YouTube page, and kind of just go through that particular side, because it can kind of get a little tricky when you just hear it for the first time, but when you see it done, I think that can be very beneficial in terms of how you can play with that at the gym. We talked about isolated strengthening and why that can be so important in addition to our functional training. And we gave some different variations in regards to not only the knee extension machine, but also looking at how we can do that with a yoga ball and then the downward dog position during yoga. And then again, we talked about for those of us that engage in running related activities, why the calf complex, specifically that soleus musculature, can be very, very beneficial. So at this time, what we'll do is we'll kind of leave the last 5 to 10 minutes or so for any questions. If you have any specific questions that you may not feel comfortable with asking directly over the chat today, feel free to send me an email. This is my email address. Again, I'm over at the Meadowmont Wellness Center if you ever want to stop by and say hello. But I just wanted to say thank you, Evan, for allowing me this opportunity. And let's talk for a few minutes if you guys have any questions.
Madi, that was great. Thank you so much. There's so much good information in there. We see patients here all the time with knee pain from running or from working out in the gym here. And I think this kind of really shines a light on kind of where that comes from and how we can avoid it. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions now. If folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat there. It's particularly quiet at the moment, so if you'd like to speak up and ask a question, go for it. There's not all that many of us here today, so that's all right. After today, this will live on our YouTube channel. So I invite you to please subscribe to that and like our Facebook page to find out about upcoming installments of Therapy Thursday. Um, so let's see here. Any questions going through there? I don't see any coming up just yet. Oh, here we go. There's one that says, any tips related to running form related to angles?
So when it comes to potentially changing someone's biomechanics, I'm not a huge fan of kind of changing someone's biomechanics, specifically if they have a decent degree of training history. I think we've seen that within a lot of potential like Olympic runners and people that have been performing at a relatively high degree. You may see some stuff where on the internet where people may demonstrate some very funky patterns from what kind of professionals are saying, but for some reason they don't really have any pain or they're not kind of having any injuries. When it comes to kind of a retraining process, I'll usually kind of keep that within the rehab context. In terms of if someone's kind of coming in with pain, and we try that and we see an in-session improvement, then maybe something to kind of consider for a short period of time to help us kind of get back into that. But once we kind of alleviate their pain and things are kind of good to go, my opinion is we kind of let them kind of go back to their regular form, just because when we talk about biomechanics within the sense of movement, you think about how many repetitions that you've had over, if you've been training for years. When it comes to a motor control aspect, it's very, very, very challenging to untrain a pattern you've been doing millions, if not trillions of times, and then be able to train a whole new pattern. So when it comes to kind of form, at least in my opinion, Evan, feel free to speak up. I'm not a huge fan of really changing somebody's form unless we can maybe use that as a temporary modification to kind of get us through a period. Again, I'm a big fan of keeping people engaged in their activity as much as we possibly can. And if that kind of serves as a window of opportunity for us to kind of get someone kind of still training but not really having a high level of pain, then I'm all for it. But within a healthy active population, I'm not a huge fan of maybe changing somebody's gait form per se.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to jump in a little bit here. I work with a lot of runners. It's something I really enjoy working with. And I would say that there is no such thing as a perfect running form. Everybody's running form is different and it's individual to you. There are certain ways that we make running form more efficient for people. But it's always tailored to the individual. We all have different body mechanics and angles that we work with. But when we're talking about kind of related to angles, probably the biggest thing that I see is that when people try to better their form and become a little more engaged, where they try to be a little more glute dominant, we talk about trying to use your glutes a little bit more when you run, is that people will start to lean forward when they run, and that angle will come from the hips, folding forward from the hips, where it should not really be coming from that location. So if we're talking about really angles, thinking about leaning forward, leaning the entire body forward, kind of always from the ankle, the entire thing coming forward, instead of just kind of folding forward halfway through your body. Those sort of angles make a lot of difference when you're running. So that can help a
Yeah, I
lot.
think
And one of the best things that I find for that is doing a little bit of hill work. You run up a hill and you can start to feel all these things start to kick in, and you just very naturally, everything leans forward, because instead of running straight up and down on the ground and trying to lean forward, well, now you're staying upright, but you're bringing the ground up to you, which is essentially the same thing.
right. And I would say one thing we've got to kind of keep in mind, if we are manipulating those angles, well, the force has to kind of go somewhere. And so if we have some sort of past history of an injury somewhere, maybe at the hip or at the ankle, we just have to kind of be a little bit considerate of that force has got to go somewhere. And so that's just an important kind of consideration as well. But definitely a good question. Thank you for your input, Evan.
All right, we have a couple minutes left here. If anybody has any other questions, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to go ahead and one more time cut and paste that those couple of links into the chat there, in case anybody wants to go ahead and find us on YouTube or Facebook. You'll find more information there. We'll kind of give it a going once, going twice. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you everybody for coming today and hanging out with us. I think this was great talk, really interesting stuff. Maddie, thank you so much for the presentation and the work put into it. Yeah, thank you everybody, and we will see you in a couple of weeks for the next Therapy Thursday. All right. Thanks all. Bye.